So we have all of our assets ready here in Artboard 2. You can also download it all from the Project C folder. All right, so this should be a little bit quicker and easier one than the previous couple projects, just because it's a little bit simpler. And I'm going to go through this a little bit faster because I know you're getting more confident and you're better at Photoshop now too. So we're going to move our eye up just a little bit, just something like that. Then we're going to turn on our galaxy. We're going to move it over our eye. We're going to turn down the opacity, maybe like 50 or something. And we're going to try to get into a spot that looks pretty good going across that iris and the pupil. Something like that's going to look pretty cool. And then we just have to make this selection. So there's lots of different ways we can make a selection for the shape of the eye. Probably the easiest one is taking our quick selection tool. We're going to drag over eye like that, select that white bit as well, and make sure you have your eye layer selected when you're doing this. And then we're going to click select and mask. We're going to really feather this out quite a bit and smooth it out. We want it to have like a smooth round edge and actually quite a bit of feathering just so it kind of blends in. So that looks pretty good. We're just going to use this as a selection at this point. Click OK. And then we're going to select our galaxy layer and click our layer mask button. And what that does is it actually creates a layer mask out of the selection that we just had. So if we increase our opacity, we can now play with our blend modes. So what we're looking at doing is something, I think linear dodge is kind of cool for this one. Screen, one of these lighten ones. We might just start with linear dodge. That one looks pretty fantastical. Pretty cool. All right, the next thing we have is the Stardust texture. And so I'm going to rotate this to the right. We're going to increase the size of it, put it down like this, and we're going to change our blend mode. I think one of these darken ones or maybe the contrast one. Pretty good. I want it to be at the bottom and the top of this screen, or we can add a layer mask and erase part of this. So we're going to set our opacity to 100%, bottom part. I'm going to duplicate this layer, just drop it in a new layer right there and rotate it 180 degrees, just so you can see what I just did. Let's zoom out just a little bit, rotate 180 degrees, and then bump it up just a little bit. So now this is kind of creating a little vignette of that bokeh texture, kind of a starry texture. I'm going to go back in here to our layer mask and erase the bottom of this layer. Cool, huh? All right, so we're getting there. We're getting there. All right, the next thing I want to do is add some color to this. So let's add a photo filter. So if we just add a photo filter with the adjustment there, let's choose one of these cooling ones. Really bump up that intensity. You could also pick a specific color. Maybe I want something a little bit darker. Something like that's pretty good. You can see that in this one, though, it's a lot different. And that's because we're not just adding a photo filter right here. We are adding a vignette. Now, I haven't shown you this, but this is a quick way to create sort of a nice vignette. Go and create a solid color with this new item adjustment layer button. We're going to make it black. We're going to put this on top, everything except for our photo filter. And now in the layer mask, we're going to make our brush super big, something like this, and make sure it's super soft as well. And we're just going to brush out in the middle, something like that. And that creates kind of a natural vignette. Now, comparing it to this artboard here, it still isn't as blue as I want. So I could go to my cooling filter here, crank that up as much as possible. We can also change the blend mode to see if that helps, or just choosing one of these other cooling filters. Let's see what blend mode does. One of those darkens might look actually pretty cool. Multiply and then drop our opacity just a little bit. So a little bit of a different color, set of colors, but I like it. Now I noticed this little detail that I had, this moon, which is in your photos bin. Add this to this layer, or to our artboard over here. And we're just going to place this in the pupil of our eye. So let's just change our blend mode just so we can see what's going on. One of these lighten ones will work for now, and we can just put it. And since the rest of the image is black, actually just leaving this as a lighten is going to work. Maybe we can see what screen does. Yeah, screen might be a little bit better. So it's just these little details that make a project better. So a little bit different than our original one, not quite as blue, but I actually like it a little bit more like this. The blue over here is a little intense. So that's how I would recreate this, and I can't wait to see what you are going to do with this. Thanks so much for watching, and enjoy this, and tag me on social media when you post this. As I mentioned in the last video, I am using an artboard to demonstrate this, which is great because now we can kind of use it as a reference. So you can kind of recreate what I'm doing. So in the artboard one sort of folder or structure, you'll see all of the different layers. And I don't want to really give away everything I'm doing, but basically we are layering this bottom image, which is the mountains. We're adding the truck or the Jeep. We're adding some cool fantastical space sci-fi kind of things going on in the background. So without further ado, let's just start working on it. So we're going to go over to our artboard 2, open these files, and we're actually going to turn off all of these other layers and just put this Valley Road file on the bottom. With my move tool, I'm going to make it the full size of this square. Now you can make this any size you want, and the cool thing about artboards is we can actually take our artboard tool, click on our artboard, and make it wider. So click on the artboard layer itself, and if you want to make a version of, and we'll just go ahead and do that for kicks and giggles, we'll make this a little bit wider. The next thing I want to do, because I know from my original version that I have these mountains in front of things like the galaxy, the sky, this moon that we've added in the background, I want to separate the mountains from the foreground. How do we do that? There's different ways, but we're going to use the quick selection tool. Make sure this layer is selected. We're just going to click and drag over our mountains. It does a pretty good job. Let's zoom in here. Let's get some of these mountains that weren't selected. Part of this white is really difficult, and it's pretty impressive that Photoshop can get the white parts of the mountain. Something like that looks pretty good. I always like to go, I might actually delete this part of the mountain because that's going to look a little bit funky with the sky in the background. So we'll just kind of cut out from here. So we'll put the sky and everything in front of those mountains that are in the distance. Next, we always go select a mask. We can see a better view, and we can see that this part of the mountain was not selected. Everything else is pretty good. We're going to increase our edge radius, make sure that's on. That looks pretty good. We're actually going to feather this a little bit because as these mountains are in the distance, I think it'll look better if the edges are a little bit blurred out, a little bit faded into the background. It doesn't have to have these sharp edges, and that just will help with the perspective and that sort of shallow depth of field, which we're going for with the stars and everything in the background. All right, so let's go ahead and output to layer mask and click OK. Actually, we're going to do new layer with layer mask because we want that original layer behind us as well. So now we just have the mountains in the foreground to work with. Next, we're going to put some of these layers in the background. So we have like this sunset sky. So we're going to add this. Let's just make this a little bit bigger. We're going to put this behind our mountains, and it doesn't matter that that sun is there, because which we don't really want in the frame, unless you want a two sun, or it could be a moon, even a two moon planet that you're creating, and that's fine. But I kind of like the glow that this sun creates around these clouds, so I'm going to place this image right around here so you get that glow coming out from behind the mountain. And then also our galaxy right here. So we're going to make this as big as the frame as well. Something like this. We might actually make this a little bit smaller. We might cut this out in just a minute. And we're going to put this underneath our mountain. Now, this is cool, but we want this to blend in, right? So there's a couple ways to do this. Let's turn off our galaxy. The sun, we can literally just drop the opacity if we want that to be sort of that style, or we could change the blend mode. Let's just look and see what that looks like if we change the blend mode. Sometimes yeah, that looks pretty good. Hard light looks pretty good. Linear light. Yeah, I think I like that hard light look. This might be a little different than what I did originally. And then we have the galaxy. Let's go scroll through them as well. We're trying to get those stars to pop out. That's kind of cool with those stars. That's pretty cool too. Maybe hard light as well, but with a little bit less opacity. Maybe 50% opacity. I think we're doing something a little bit different than our other image. I think I'm going to move this over here to the side like so that we see more of the galaxy and it's not covered up by the moon that we're going to create. So let's actually drop this into a layer mask, and then we're going to just sort of brush out the outside edges. So with our brush set to black, opacity 100, we're just going to brush over the edges, like so. I think that looks pretty good. Let's actually make this a little bit bigger. Something like that looks pretty cool. Awesome, so we're getting there, we're getting there. Next we're going to do is add this moon. So we have this red moon, orange moon that I got online. I think you call that a blood moon. So there's different ways to select the moon, but we're just going to use our quick selection brush. We're going to select and mask. We're actually going to shift the edge in a little bit because we don't want to get any of that black on the edge, but we still have like a bit of a feather. Smart radius is on, that's pretty cool. And that adds it to a new layer. So we're going to put this underneath our mountains, but in front of our sky. Now let's rotate this as I did. I think something like that looks a little bit better. Now you'll see that there's all these different techniques that I added here to add some glow and stuff. We're going to continue to work on that, and it's going to get there. We're just kind of layering our layers right now. Then we're going to play more with colors and things like that. Now I do want to add this glow that I have behind this moon. So what I'm going to actually do is duplicate this layer and just create a glow for the moon behind it. So I'm going to duplicate that layer, double click it. We're going to choose outer glow, and then we're going to choose a color that's similar to this red. So we're going to just go into that red and then maybe boost it just a little bit, make it a little bit more saturated. And then we can change how bright or dark it is, the opacity. Maybe want to try a different blend mode. Normal. Try overlay. I like overlay sometimes. Yeah, overlay looks pretty good. Maybe drop that opacity. Maybe make it a little bit more yellow. And that's looking pretty good. And let's actually just make it a little bit smaller. So you can see that there's still the moon there. So we're going to make it a little bit smaller. And this gives us just a little bit more extra room to edit our moon compared to adding the actual glow to the main moon layer. We can move things around, make them bigger, smaller, that kind of thing. So next, let's select our Jeep, and we're going to add this Jeep layer. So let's take our quick selection brush again. We're going to try to get this Jeep selected. This is a little bit of a tricky one because it does have some bars at the top of the Jeep that are a little bit harder to select. And you can see here at the bottom, it selects a lot of this road because it's such a similar color. Now, it's going to be not too big in our graphics, so it doesn't have to necessarily be perfect, but, you know, as close as possible, it would be nice to get it to be perfect. And you can go in here after the fact with your layer mask and paint stuff out or paint stuff in. We're just trying to get a quick sort of selection. So let's see, this bar has been giving me a hard time. Let's see if we can get rid of that part of the bar, that part of the bar. Then I'm just going to click in these little holes. This is where Photoshop and creating these images takes a long time. Okay. Let's go over here. This area, this area. Oops, it didn't like me doing that. All right, I think this is pretty good. Let's just make sure our general area looks pretty good. Okay, let's get this tire down here. All right, now let's go into select and mask. Let's go up. Actually, let's turn down our feathering. Our smoothing at 3 is fine. Shift edge, let's set to 0. Whoops. Set that to 0. And that's actually looking pretty good. Now we could go in here and remove those little areas right here inside. Maybe edge detection might help with that a little bit. Yeah, we got edge detection, which is going to help. Thank you, edge detection. Cool. So edge detection does help a little bit. So you can see this could take a long time. So I don't want to just spend an hour just making the selection. So I'm going to be happy with that for now. I'm going to click OK. That creates this new layer. And we're going to just size this and put it down a little bit smaller down the road, right? All right. So down the road, this Jeep is headed off for some sort of adventure. Trying to make it proportional to the road where it's at. Something like that looks pretty good. All right, so now we're just seeing what we have added to this layer. We've got our Jeep, which is cool. Let's see, we've got some tire tracks that I've created and a couple little details like the shadow underneath the car. So remember how we created that shadow before? We're just going to create a copy of this layer. We're going to double click. We're going to create a color overlay. We're going to blur it. So we have that layer selected. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And let's see. About like 15, 13, 14. That probably is good. Then we're just going to take our move tool. Holding the control key down, we're going to take this top one and just kind of reverse it. Something like this. Now, because it wasn't at the bottom edge of this layer, we do have to move the layer up then. Something like that looks pretty good. And we're just going to drop the opacity 50 or something like that. Even changing the blend mode, something like overlay, allows the background or this road to come through a little bit more too. So I think that's pretty good. We also have these tire tracks. So these were done with a brush. So let's go ahead and create a new layer. So let's zoom in here really quickly. We'll create a new layer for now on top of our Jeep. We're going to take our brush, and in our brushes, we're going to take one that looks something like a tire track. Something like this 80 And you could change the spacing so it looks more like a tire track. This looks pretty good. We're gonna change it to black. And we're trying to draw it, and we want to change the rotation of this brush too, actually. See how I'm drawing up, and it actually, that looks kind of good, but I think if we're drawing this way, that looks better. So let's change the rotation to 90 degrees. That looks pretty good. So let's just do a couple quick. And you'll notice that it should get bigger as it gets closer to me. So I'm just going to go over these a couple times. These are going to be blended into the background. And as I get closer to me, it's going to actually, going to get bigger. So let me actually undo this. There's another option, a thing that you can do. Let's take our brush. You can turn on smoothing up here. Smoothing will actually make your brush strokes a little bit smoother. And I definitely recommend having that on if you aren't that good of an artist, which I'm not. So I'm trying to follow what the road would look like. And also, as it gets closer to me, they get further apart, which makes sense, right? Because that just helps to trick the audience or the viewer into thinking this tire track actually comes from this Jeep. So I could spend a lot of time doing this. Now, I am not that good at this. This is something that I admit I'm not that good at. Something like that looks pretty good though. Pretty good. And now let's put this underneath our car. Let's change the blend mode to overlay again. Drop the opacity, this time like 75% or something, looks pretty good. Cool, so we are getting there. The next thing we got to do is play around with the colors, and then also we have this sort of cloud effect. Let's see these clouds, put this on top, and you can see that I kind of just added it to the top and bottom of everything on this side, creating sort of like a foggy look. Let's see, so it was this layer right here. So I actually have it over everything. I just used an overlay filter. So I'm just going to do the same. We're going to do overlay. And you can see that it automatically gives this sort of style to this. Maybe if I rotate it, something like that is pretty good. And what I can do to kind of blend it in just a little bit more is put this in a layer mask, and then we're just going to erase parts of this. Now I want to get my original brush, just like a regular brush, back. We're going to, oh, that was not the brush. Original brush, like this. We're going to turn our opacity down to 50 and just brush in the middle along the mountains a little bit. We kind of want just the clouds to be appearing on the top and bottom. I have this other layer that is kind of giving this glow to the mountains as if there's a lot of light coming from this moon. So I'm going to create that sort of glow layer right behind the mountain layer. So I'm going to have a new layer. We can just use our kind of regular brush. This time though, we're going to choose sort of a orange, maybe start with this orange, make it a little bit more yellow. And we're just going to paint over, right over behind our mountains. Now I'm just following the top of the mountains like this, paint over a couple times because our opacity is a little bit lower. And now if we put this behind our mountains, you can see that it kind of gives that glow to it. Move it down just a little bit. You could also play with different blend modes. Again, always playing with the blend modes to see if there's something that looks good. Linear, add, dodge, that looks pretty good to me. All right, so this is getting pretty close to what we had it in our original, but you can see the colors are different. And that's because I just added an overall curves or levels adjustment here. You can see that. So let's just do that, and let's go ahead. Curves, levels right here. So if I take this levels adjustment, we'll just add a little bit of contrast like so. You can see that by bringing in the left point and the right point, it just makes everything a little bit more contrasty. Now, if I drop down this RGB menu, you can actually adjust the contrast and colors for specific channels. So red, blue, green. So if I turn it to red and I take this down, it kind of gives everything more of like a reddish magenta tint. And I want that because that helps blend everything together. That makes things kind of look good. If we want to give it more of like a purplish tint as well, we can bring down our blues, maybe bring, let's see, yeah, we can give super purple. It's a little bit of a different style, but I still like it. You can see that my Jeep is a little bit further down the road in this one. They got further on their adventure. And just by doing that, you can see that we've added quite a bit of color to our moon back here. Now, I think that moon is a little bit dark still. So for our moon over here, let's see, where is that moon layer? It's probably a good idea to name your layers. We're just going to add a new adjustment layer and just make it right just for this moon. So we're going to make sure it's a clipping mask. So it's just applying to the moon, and we're just going to increase the contrast and the overall exposure with a little curves layer. Cool. So it looks a little bit different than the other one. That might just be the rotation or the glow that I had created for this this moon over here. And I think that's pretty good. Our clouds, they're maybe a little bit too bright, so let's drop the exposure of those clouds. Another thing we can do just to, again, help with the details, the color of the Jeep is a little off. It's a little bit unsaturated, so we can let's add a little vibrancy to it. Vibrance layer, and again, clip it to just the Jeep. We're going to add the vibrance. A little bit of saturation. That's not doing much. Yeah, because that Jeep is... Oh, this is to the shadow. That's why. The shadow should be underneath the Jeep. So let's move that shadow underneath the Jeep. And now let's make sure our vibrance is just clipped to our Jeep itself. So it does a little bit. We might want to add a little bit of a levels or curves adjustment as well. Just brighten that Jeep up. We can go into the red curve as well, similar to with the levels, add a little bit of red. Again, just also play with different blend modes. Again, always playing with the blend modes to see if there's something that looks good. Linear, add, dodge, that looks pretty good to me. All right, so this is getting pretty close to what we had it in our original, but you can see the colors are different. And that's because I just added an overall curves or levels adjustment here. You can see that. So let's just do that, and let's go ahead. Curves, levels right here. So if I take this levels adjustment, we'll just add a little bit of contrast like so. You can see that by bringing in the left point and the right point, it just makes everything a little bit more contrasty. Now, if I drop down this RGB menu, you can actually adjust the contrast and colors for specific channels. So red, blue, green. So if I turn it to red and I take this down, it kind of gives everything more of like a reddish magenta tint. And I want that because that helps blend everything together. That makes things kind of look good. If we want to give it more of like a purplish tint as well, we can bring down our blues, maybe bring, let's see, yeah, we can give super purple. It's a little bit of a different style, but I still like it. You can see that my Jeep is a little bit further down the road in this one. They got further on their adventure. And just by doing that, you can see that we've added quite a bit of color to our moon back here. Now, I think that moon is a little bit dark still. So for our moon over here. Let's see, where is that moon layer? It's probably a good idea to name your layers. We're just going to add a new